now off. So welcome to this evening's session. I think, as we're all aware, menopause is a time for a lot of changes for all of us. And a lot of that can also be experienced as loss, which is where we come in with inviting Tracey, who's an excellent grief whisperer, I believe is the title you go by, Tracey, to talk to us today about and have a conversation with us really about how loss throughout our life can really help, can really impact us, and how to cope with it, and help others in perimenopause as well. Over to you then, Tracey. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, for that introduction. Let's start with a little bit about who am I, so you know a little bit about me before we go on to the proper topic. I'm Tracey Jane. I'm the grief whisperer and loss coach and the creator of the Loss Cafe. My background has always been in nursing and care, and I have a large family, and I do look after both generations, so elderly and right through to everybody really. It's become a personal mission for me to bring about awareness of loss, because my father-in-law died, and it really sort of emphasized that people just don't really talk about things with losses in our lives, not just people, but in general, of confidence and things. We need to talk more about it, because there is a lot of sadness in this world, and we really need to look after ourselves. And hopefully it won't implode, and we can all make the world a better place to live in. So this is quite a difficult topic tonight. It's quite an emotive topic. So if anybody feels uncomfortable, I don't mind if they need to leave it and review it another time, or even not come back into the session. I won't be offended, because it is a very emotive topic. And the very reason we're talking about it is to build the awareness of it. So let's have a look at what we're actually going to talk about tonight. So we're aware of where we're going. So we're going to talk about tonight about what is meant by loss and accepting our past and who we are. Different types of loss, because there may be some that you don't consider a loss, but actually will have loss symptoms and grief symptoms with them, and how we manage those in the present. And then also the similarities between perimenopause and loss symptoms, because believe it or not, they're very similar in a lot of ways. And in our timeline, we're like to experience both at the same time. So we've done a section as well on how to cope with this in the future, and manage, practical tips to help us sort of get through these sessions of our life, which can be quite difficult sometimes. So let's look at the definition of loss first, and how really what that means. So what is loss? Okay, so loss is defined in the dictionary as the fact or process of losing something or someone. So very often we can think, well, loss means losing a person. It's not just people. There are other things that we can lose in a number of ways. Can I just ask, though, has anybody lost anyone or anything recently, even if it's just your memory? Can you just try type yes or no in the chat for me, so I know what sort of things that people might have lost recently? It could even be your memory. Just let me know what it maybe is that you've lost recently. Okay, that would be great if you just let me know.
And I'd like to come in here really, because actually I think I understand that in a big way. I've left my job. That happened because I lost my ability to do that job through burnout. There was a sense of losing my identity and having to change my identity. So, all of those things were losses, and were definitely grief associated with them. And sometimes that's anger, isn't it, as well, when that comes in.
Yeah.
So, loss, but I haven't lost anyone recently, but I'm in the process of losing my mum, because she's got Alzheimer's. And that's really hard, because we're losing the person we had. We physically got my mum, but mentally there's so much of her that's just not there anymore. And that's really hard. And I've talked to you a lot about that, and that's been really helpful, and it's also helping me help my dad, which is great.
Yes. And I think the worst thing about that actually is you lose the personality of that person as you knew them.
Yes.
And then you're left with this sort of shell of somebody who's a bit like them, but not quite the same. And actually that's more difficult than anything to sort of manage. Very difficult.
It is. And, it's such a cruel disease, isn't it? Because my mum recognizes at times that things aren't there.
Yes.
And so she's suffering from loss as well.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. Yeah. So that sort of leads on to what I was going to say next, which is when we lose
So just so I don't know if you've seen the chats, but you have got some input in the chat as well.
Okay, I haven't actually got that up, Jane. So what sort of
Do you want
thing?
me to keep an eye on that for you?
If you would, yeah. What's
What
been
we've
put
got
so
here is
far?
somebody saying, and I'm not going to use names in case people don't
No,
want
no,
me to
no. I just
use
say
the
yes or
names,
no, really.
but lost my father-in-law this time last year and also lost myself for a while. And I understand that, lost myself for a while. That's so familiar to me because I
Yeah,
think I did as well. And that sounds a bit weird, but I did. It does sound weird, doesn't it? But actually, it's so much of what happens. We do feel like we've lost ourselves. We've lost
yes,
our sense of identity. We've lost who we are. So that is a key thing, isn't it?
yeah. And something I talk about a bit later is losing that role and that identity, particularly with family members, because we tend to have a title with our names as well, like daughter,
Yeah.
mother, son. We tend to have the mixtures that go with that. So when we lose something or someone that we become attached to, our emotions are involved in the attachments, and these can cause all sorts of difficult feelings. Emotion stands for energy in motion. That's why emotions are temporary, but seem to be in our heads forever sometimes. We need to learn to accept these emotions and view them as normal and not a problem. The more we see that and have that perspective on things, actually, the easier it becomes to live with them. So sometimes it's just easier to accept our past, which is not an easy thing to do. And that takes courage. Our past has made us who we are. And we are moving into the next stage of our lives, hence losing our earlier years of our life. So actually, we're having a loss when we get to this part of our life. So we're saying goodbye to the past, a loss of the woman we were, but actually, it's a chance to be a new woman or a better woman that you want to be. So actually, it's an opportunity rather than a negative. Okay, so that's quite a good thing.
I think it's that opportunity, isn't it, to redefine who you are following these experiences of loss,
Yes, yeah,
because they
definitely.
do change us, but they don't have to have a negative impact going forwards.
No,
And be very
definitely not.
positive.
Yeah,
Just so you know that we've got a couple of people who are also following on Facebook Live. So we've got quite a number
welcome.
of people who are taking interest in what you're talking about, Tracey.
Welcome. Thank you. That'd be wonderful. Right. So we were just talking about becoming maybe a new person, a new woman, or even somebody you wanted to be and you've just not had the chance to be because of your lifestyle. So I think the next question I've got is let me know in the chat if you accept your past, because accepting our past is really hard. And actually, it's probably shaped who we've become. So if you could just let me know if you're happy to accept your past and you're happy to just move on and start a new chapter. So happy or not happy would be great. Because I think sometimes if we're not happy, we might have something that's holding us back from becoming somebody newer if we want to be them. And that can be a stumbling block as well.
Yeah. And we've also got comments in the chat that say, haven't lost anyone or anything in the recent past, but I have lost huge in the past, and not happy about the
Okay.
past. I think that's person saying, and I would say that, talking about loss, my most recent loss is actually my first ever dog.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and I'd lost cats before, and that was hard, but losing kind of the dog was a huge gap in my life. A huge gap, and it affected all of us, my kids as well, even though they left the home after we got the dog, because he was their first dog too. He was
Yeah.
special to all of us, and the other dogs will be too, but losing anything is huge, isn't it?
It is, and it's all to do with the attachments we have, I think, sometimes, which is I'm going to talk a bit more about the attachments as well. But
Yeah.
particularly pets, we form this bond with like we do with people, and it becomes an emotional attachment. So, like I was saying before, you've got that energy in motion going on, and when that disappears, we don't really know what to do with it.
No, no, it's definitely challenging, isn't it?
Mm, very much so. So, was there any was there you said there was one person that said they weren't happy with the past?
That's right. And also
Okay.
struggling with the idea of losing, dogs and family and things like. It's
Okay.
really, really hard though, isn't it? To even, this is why we don't talk about it enough, isn't it? Because the thought of the loss brings that huge sense of emotion that then triggers other feelings in our bodies.
And I think we're a little bit frightened of the emotions that come with that as well, and what they
Massively.
might do to us.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things with loss and grief is the best thing you can do, and it takes so much courage to do, is to face it head on, because then you're dealing with it. Because if we don't deal with it, actually, it does us a lot more damage mentally and physically, which I'll explain in a bit. That can be a lot
Yeah. That
worse.
tendency of us to sort of push it down.
And deny it.
Yeah, I know. I talked to you at length, didn't I? That I experienced loss of my grandparents, and just to give a context to that, my grandparents lived with us
Yeah.
at a young age. But what I experienced was my family demonstrating that they felt grief.
Yeah.
And I think that at that age, I think I was about 13 at the first time.
Mm.
And I think that experience probably helped me.
Yeah, because I think we need, as children, we need to be shown how to deal with grief. And the generation above us very much were very quiet people. They kept themselves to their feelings to themselves. And I think as the society moves on, we're now being a lot more open about our feelings. And the best thing we can do is show children
Yeah,
how to
absolutely.
cope with those losses
Yes.
and how to
And
deal with those feelings.
and be honest about the risk as well. I think
Yeah,
that's quite important. Just
yeah,
to say, in the chat, we've got somebody else also saying they're not happy about their past, and another person saying mum's been gone a few years, but the 10 years as a carer has left a lot of difficult emotions. And that's something that I
yeah,
can really relate to, because both in that very first major loss I experienced, where my mum and my grandma had to be nursed to my great grandma, who'd had a stroke and was unable to do anything and was basically invalided to her bed in the house.
yeah,
That I remember them saying to me how that had impacted how they felt, and we all found it difficult to go into that room. But also watching my dad care for my mum,
yes.
and the impact that's having on him. So I can really see how that comment coming in around being the carer for such a long time makes things even harder, doesn't it?
It does, and that will come. Oh, this is a difficult thing to say, Jane, but afterwards, he's going to need a lot of help with feeling very lost, because he won't have anybody to look after. He'll feel
Absolutely.
guilty. He won't really know what to do with his time, and so that will be a whole new chapter for him again.
Absolutely. And they've been together for, whoa, well over 60 years. So,
Yeah, and it's
you
true
know,
what
it's,
they say. They lose an arm when they've been together that long, because they're
yeah.
just, they function together as a unit, don't they? And that's
You can
difficult.
see him struggling with the loss and putting that struggle into being busy
Yes,
already.
yes, yeah, and that's something another coping mechanism again that people do
Definitely my
when they've
dad's.
got
Oh,
problems.
yeah, very much my dad's. I'm
Yeah.
busy. I'm okay. I'm busy.
Yes, exactly, which sort of leads on to the present finds us in a battle in our busy lives for our identity, purpose, and some wisdom, and becoming of a new person. Don't know about you, but I see it as an amazing opportunity, which I talked about. Um, so we have such busy lives now. We sometimes forget to look after ourselves and have these really good habits in place to actually cope with when these things come along. Because very often we can have other losses, and we need to be prepared for those, because they can happen out of the blue. And we just need to have a natural habit that jumps in there just to give us a bit of protection there somewhere along the line. So we'll move on to different forms of losses now anyway, because I don't want to dwell on the grief side of losing people too much at the moment. We'll come back to that a little bit in a while. So as you can see, there's different types of losses on the screen. There is loss of identity, loss of emotions, loss of purpose. I mean, loss of emotions you probably have experienced, Jane, from the burnout, because you go a little bit numb and you don't feel things so much.
I think I went through the numbness into intensity of anxiety and a whole range that it was. I lost my resilience as well, and
Yes.
therefore I was crying or angry or scared
Yes.
constantly. So I think I went into. I think my brain was making those small 90-second emotional hits, chemical things, go into overdrive in
Yes.
such a big way, because it was so used to the stress hormone that it was just craving that, and it destroyed me. I'm going to be really honest, it destroyed me.
Yeah.
So that I had loss of everything: loss of confidence, loss of identity, loss of purpose, loss of memory. I lost me, so I had the
Yes.
loss of someone as well, really.
And that's really difficult to come back from. And they are on the list. They're all things, because somebody else might say to you, oh, well, you just lost your purpose. That's not a loss. Actually, that comes with symptoms of,
Yeah. Well,
the
that's
brain
why,
fog and everything else that comes together.
so many midlife women struggle once their children get to the age where they leave home.
Mm,
Who am I? What's my purpose?
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
a real genuine loss,
it is.
because
It is.
everything that they were living for, that everything that has changed, and that's
Yeah.
so hard. And we do tend to belittle it, and we
Yes.
shouldn't.
Yes, because actually, as well, as women and being female, we feel things so much more than the
Yeah.
men do. So that is going to have a huge
We're
effect on
hormonally
us.
wired for it, I'm
Yeah,
afraid, as
we
well.
are. We are. Very much so.
Although this is the advantage of lower estrogen post menopause, because our tendency to put everybody else first in that feelings section disappears a little bit, which means that
Yeah,
we can start to work on ourselves.
that's good. So yeah, so I've also got loss of pets down there, which we've just slightly touched on a little bit there. Loss of memory and loss of someone, which obviously is probably the biggie on the list of all of them. So let's look at loss of identity first. So in some families during perimenopause, when the children leave home, as you just talked about, Jane, some mothers do feel bereft and experience a form of grief. They feel they no longer have a purpose because the children have grown and fled the nest. As parents, something we can do to protect ourselves is to have our own interests, so that we have a second focus there, so that when the children leave, it's not the be all and end all of how we feel. It
That's the
just makes
same
it
really in
easy.
relationships, isn't it?
Yeah, and it helps us shift our focus then as well, so that it's not all on this feeling guilty because we haven't done right by the kids, or we should have done something for the children, because at the end of the day, our children are not ours to keep. They are ours to guide, and they will leave us eventually when they're ready. Some of them never leave, but most of them do leave.
Some of them come
They
back.
do, they need to be able to know that we can carry on with our lives, so that's good. Also around this time, because of the timeline, we may experience the loss of a family member, including our parents, because of the age we might be, and even pets in our family, which we just talked about. For some, this can be really heart-wrenching. Like, I'm same as you, Jane. I had my old dog Benji for 15 years. I went through 2 marriages with him. He was always the one that was there in the evenings when I was broken. He was wonderful. And when I lost him, it came to the end of his life, I really struggled to function normally due to the emotions that came with that attachment.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and but I'm left with loving memories and pictures of him, and they bring me such joy now when I think of what we used to do together and the walks we had. And it was just me and him. He was like my best friend, but I managed to cope with it. I moved on, and I don't regret having him in my life. And I think that's the biggest thing. We mustn't regret having an animal or a person in our life.
And I think that fear of losing them can sometimes lead to a fear of opening up ourselves to the power of these relationships and emotions, can't it?
Yes, because if you have a broken relationship, sometimes you just don't want to dip your toe in that
Yeah.
pool again.
You're fearful of the same thing happening again.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. So you've got things like excuse me, look at my notes. I just want to make sure I'm in the right place. So I don't regret having him in my life. Most life events, when we think about it, have a parting behind them. So moving home, there'll be life memories in that house if you've been there with your children growing up, or just you and your new partner. Perhaps you moved in there when you got married. When you leave that, it's got all the emotional attachments to it, and that's what can be really hard. And you will experience some sorts of lost symptoms from that as well. You'll be a little bit upset maybe that you've left that house, but I think we all know when we do that, we know it's a new start, and it's viewing everything as a new start so we can move forwards. So yeah, emotions and memories attached to that. Retirement. People don't see retirement as a loss, but actually, when you retire from a job you really love and enjoy, you can lose contact with people. You can lose your routine. You've got a whole new routine to try and put together. You've got new focuses to find. So that you can experience loss symptoms from that as well, if you're not sort of aware that it's coming. Because the work connections there, that's a social thing. You might find you've then got no social connections once you leave work. So
And we
it's
know,
separation
that's
again.
something that's something that has been talked about in other spaces, hasn't it,
Yeah.
Tracey? That lack of
Think
social
so.
connections when the job disappears. For
Yes.
whatever reason the job disappears, it's a big part of your life.
Yes.
We spend a large chunk of our time in our workplace,
Yeah.
and that's hard.
Definitely. Because that sort of leads on to if you lose your job all of a sudden as well. So for whatever reason, the company folds or you're made redundant and you've got no choice in that, the choice is actually taken from you, and that can affect your self-confidence, the way you feel, your identity. It can affect all of
Yeah.
those things because you just really don't know what to do with yourself, particularly if what your job is your life, which these days a lot of people do have that as their lives. That's what their life is their work.
So many more of us now are kind of defining ourselves around what we do, aren't we? So it's either the job or our purpose in the home. And because we define ourselves by the doing of those things,
Yeah.
the loss of those things becomes a really challenging part of who we are and moving forwards.
Yes, very much so. So yeah, so you've got the sorry about this.
That's okay. I keep interrupting, which
That's
probably loses
okay.
flow.
Yeah, so we've talked about retirement and also being made redundant. Because what I find with redundant was talking to people, it can lead to a loss of confidence, identity, but also it builds up feelings of mistrust and anger and abandonment, all symptoms of grief and perimenopause, because sometimes you don't see it coming. You could go to work one day and there's no job. And that then fuels the fear of where's the money going to come from? How am I going to manage? And it's almost like you've had a hurt. So you don't really know then where you're going to go from. And that's very difficult for a lot of people to manage.
And the interesting thing as well for midlife women is that this is the time in their career and in their life where actually there are so many women losing their jobs for one reason or another and leaving that workplace.
Yes.
Because often the menopause symptoms means that our effectiveness at work is challenged. And, that so that the statistics are not pleasant when it comes to that. And that's why there's such a big movement now to try and get workplaces menopause friendly, and actually
Yes.
some guidance around how that looks and what that looks like that's come from the government now, which is brilliant. But
Yeah.
it's such a challenge.
Yeah. And I also think that, again, the positivity in this is we need to view this as a new opportunity. So yes,
Absolutely.
the job has gone. It might be a vacation for you, but it doesn't mean there isn't something else out there you can do that might actually be an even better job for you.
And this is where I'm a classic example of that.
Yeah.
I was a head teacher, deputy CEO, running my own school, building a trust, and that went because I had the burnout and everything else. That went, and I've created a new purpose, and I understand that loss because there was this loss for such a while.
Yeah.
But there was also this drive in me that said, okay, what can I do to make better of this circumstance? How can I stop this happening for others?
Yes.
So yeah, I'm your classic example of that being a new opportunity.
Yeah. Which is really a good way of looking at life in general, really, is looking for opportunities rather than looking at
Well, it's kind of that glass half full, glass half empty, isn't it?
it is.
Scenario.
Yeah, very much so. So we also talked about well, I've got divorce down here, but you mentioned something, Jane, which was about relationships, I think. So I put
Yes.
divorce too is quite a parting with someone that will have lost symptoms attached to it too, because I think sometimes that level of intimacy that was a level that was present in the relationship, that can destroy us a bit emotionally, and trust and fear, again, all these judgments coming in because of what's happened to us. And I think self-doubt can creep in there too. And that inner voice starts to say, nobody's going to love me again. And that goes into the self-worth. And but again, that's all lost symptoms that we need to deal with and to find our way back from.
And unfortunately, the statistics for women in divorce are really high during menopause period as well. So there's lots of reasons behind this, but loss is a big thing at this period of our life.
Yeah, it is very much so. We form emotional attachments as humans, and that's what causes the pain when those attachments get broken, because it really does feel painful sometimes. So losing a spouse or family member causes the deepest pain, as these tend to be the longest attachments we form. Sometimes we lose our identity or role in life after the loss of a parent, or parent. We can feel abandoned and guilty, particularly if we cared for them at home, because they
Which
were
is what
part
was
of our
said earlier, wasn't
routine.
it, about being the carer? And
Yeah,
an interesting thing that I read just today actually was that we feel the pain of loss in the same part of our brain as we feel physical pain.
yeah. And that's why when people talk about heartache when they lose a husband or wife, it's actually physically true. They are feeling heartache in their heart,
Yeah.
which must be, luckily, I haven't got there yet, but I would dread to think how I would deal with that if it happened. But this is the whole point of this talk, is to give people coping mechanisms and to look at the best way we can deal with this.
Yeah.
So we form emotional attachments as humans, which is what causes the pain. We then got to look at, the more we grieve over the loss, and this is the best indication ever, the more we grieve over the loss, actually the more we were loved by that person, or we did love that person. So grief is like the opposite of love, if you like. So you then can look at, right, I'm really hurting over this, so actually I really loved this person and they really loved me, and we must take comfort in how much somebody loved us and what they would do for us and how they would be with us, because we forget that sometimes. We get too instaunched in having them having gone, and we can't see the amount of love that was actually present at that time and how much of a wonderful person we were because they wanted to love us. We must bear these things in mind because it eases some of the heartache that comes with what we experience. So the more we grieve over the loss, the more we love someone or something. But the good news is that from this sadness can come joy and love. It is a matter of perspective to a certain extent. How much did you love that person or pet? The height of the loss or grief is an indication on the amount of love in that connection when we really think about it. And something I use in my coaching is, let's be the remembrers of our loved ones and learn to treasure those memories. So what we need to do is have some memories in our head about people. So say you, for instance, Jane, just because it's easy to do that with your mother.
Yeah.
While you've got the chance, make those memories, but also think back on when you were small and when you fell or something and she gave you a cuddle. And we need to try and bring those back as
Well,
much as we
one of my
can
best
remember.
memories with my mum is the hours we spent on the phone putting the world to rights.
Yes.
I mean, and
Yeah.
my mum was a fabulous artist. The way she used to decorate the house over Christmas, and it was all handmade, and she was an infant school teacher, and they
Yeah.
used to do this thing every summer where the year groups created this dance piece.
Right.
And she would
Okay.
create the artwork, and so in
Amazing.
the Jubilee year, she created a replica of the Golden Coach using our
Wow.
pram. And
Yeah.
it looked amazing with painting on it and everything. It's just incredible. So there are some amazing memories.
Yeah. And those are the sort of things that will get you through the other side when things aren't so great,
Yeah,
because
because
you
I'm
can
already
use
missing
those.
those conversations, which I think that's why that came first. Because we can no longer have the phone calls where we put the world to rights. We can
Yeah.
have conversations sometimes. And I treasure those moments when the conversations we have got some sort of meaning to them. I do
Yes.
treasure it.
Yeah.
And what I found recently is the thing that she can connect to easiest is her time as a teacher.
Right. Oh, well, that's a good connection then, isn't it?
So I can talk to her a little bit about, children and things like that.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. And that's what you need to hold on to, in that feeling, because you will need that later on, just to
Oh yeah,
ease, you know. And
yeah,
what we tend to do when I'm working with this is we use that memory as a bubble for protection to a certain extent, so that
yeah.
we can protect ourselves and comfort ourselves when we need to. So one of the tips I do say to people is make as many memories as you can while people are still here. So when they've gone, we can use those memories to feel their presence and take comfort from them. When you're with people, just be present, but file that memory and feeling. So I had a family dinner, I think it was the weekend before last, and the laughter with the grandchildren and the in-laws, I just filed that away, because that particular moment just made my heart sing, because everybody was laughing and joking and we were all bouncing off one another. But I've filed that away in my memory so that if I ever need to use it, I've got it. I will talk about memory being difficult in a minute when we get to the similar symptoms, because I know not all our memories work well in menopause, but sometimes if you file it along with the feeling that you're feeling at that point in time, if you bring that feeling back, that memory sometimes comes back with it, which is a really useful thing to do.
Perhaps not the middle of the night nosebleed with your grandson sleeping in the bed between
No,
you.
that's not
He
a
won't go
memory,
anywhere else.
really.
He's not necessarily the best one, is it? But yes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So during our second spring, we need to be aware of ways of protecting ourselves from the symptoms of loss or menopause. The best way to explain this is, I don't know if anybody watches the women's football, but we all know in a football team you have your defenders that stop the ball going into the goal, basically. And the 4 defenders we need to protect us from the stress and from the grief symptoms dragging us down to a point where we can't come back are nutrition, sleep, exercise, and there's one more, excuse me, socializing with others. That's a really important one. All of those, if we can put them in place, are the habits we need to help prevent stress and loss overwhelming us. Because they can protect our physical and mental health when we go through an emotional trauma as well as being under stress. And this is the same with grief. It helps us manage our grief and our loss to a certain extent, but they're new skills we do need to learn. But if they're regular habits in there and something happens, they'll automatically kick in to protect us. So there are some practical things we can help to do with both conditions of perimenopause and grief. And the symptoms are actually very similar when it comes to the two setups, basically. So let me just find the next one for us. So you can see here, these are both symptoms. One's for loss and one's for perimenopause. And they're very, very close in a lot of ways. But there are things we can do to help ease these. I'm not going to say it goes away because it doesn't go away, because you're going through a very traumatic time with some of these. And we need to be able to just take the edge off them so that we can still function properly, basically.
And I think it's also that remembering, isn't it, that those uncomfortable emotional triggers, the chemical signals, are only 90 seconds long.
Yes.
So what we do in our heads with that signal is really going to impact how deep and uncomfortable some of those persisting emotional feelings are.
Yes. Yeah. And it's very much about knowing that that will go away. Like I said earlier, emotion is emotions in motion. So they're not going, they're only temporary, they're not permanent. And if we can learn to cope with them for those 90 seconds, and like I said earlier, it feels like you're there for hours in your head, but actually it's a very short time to manage those emotions. And I'm not saying don't express them. I'm saying so that we can function in daily life, we need to learn a way of coping with them.
And I think actually the key to that is allow them, notice them,
yes,
sit with them.
Yes.
Don't try and fight them.
Yeah, face them.
Because the more we fight them, the more we persist them.
Yes, very much so. So, facing them, it makes things, it takes courage to face them, but actually if you face them, it will become easier to cope with.
Acknowledge them and allow them. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So when we have interrupted sleep, as we all know, it can make us less able to cope with loss and emotions. And a bedtime routine is essential. A bit like our defenders on the football team, when facing a loss, the brain needs calm and focus. Our brain needs an automatic chore so it can go into autopilot. I mean, I use reading. Some people game on their phones because the backlights aren't as bad now. You just need something where your brain's going to slip into autopilot so that it can begin to just shut down a bit. And I think as well, when you're emotionally upset, we're not always able to sleep, but sometimes just closing your eyes and being there and resting is just as good, because it rests the body and the mind. It's that rest syndrome rather than deep. You don't need deep sleep. You just need to rest your body and your mind when it's going through that emotional trauma. So does anybody put in the chat what they use when they go to sleep? Is there any other suggestions? Because I only got a couple. That's what I use. But is there any other suggestions?
I mean, interestingly, I think one of the key things around sleep, there's nothing in the chat at the moment, but one of the key things around sleep for me is having a really good sleep hygiene, which is that sleep routine.
Yeah.
You know, like you do with young children and babies, don't you? You have this
Yes.
same routine that signals to them now is time to go to bed,
Yes. Yeah.
you know? And that's very much, I know when I was really struggling, when I was in the deepest parts of my anxiety and burnout, certain things happened automatically because of the routines
Yeah.
that were there that meant they happened because I didn't have to think about them.
Yes.
And
And
sleep was
it
one of
protects
them.
us.
You know, sleep was one of them. I went to bed routinely.
Mm.
And prior to bed, you know, I leave my phone downstairs and I read. And then, you know, you go to bed. And it's kind of that, I think, is what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
If those things are established, it's so much easier
Yes.
because we're not having to fight to do things. And we can
Yeah.
just acknowledge, okay, I'm struggling right now. I'm just going to rest my eyes.
And a lot
Yeah.
of us do struggle in loss. So to be able to just rest, if you can get your body to rest, it sort of powers you up for the next bit that you need to deal with, which is really helpful sometimes.
So what we've got in the chat now is I read, but I wake up a lot, so I read when I wake up. And I know that's what my husband does because I then see the backlight on. Like, if I stir, I notice the backlight on the Kindle.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the interesting things I heard around if you wake up a lot is to get into the habit of doing something that your body and mind hates doing.
Yes. Yeah, I have heard that one as
I
well.
don't know how effective that is. I've never tried it.
No, I
I
haven't.
have tried, and I do know it worked for me, brain dumping.
Yes. Yeah. And
So
that's
if there's
something.
something that's persisting in my
Yeah.
brain and it just won't go away,
Yeah.
scroll it all down. And
Yeah.
there's something amazing about the fact you've written it all down.
Yeah, because it comes out of in here. It's not going
Yeah,
round and round in here. It's
exactly.
out, and then you
Yeah,
can leave it and let and not deal, deal with it
yeah.
another time. Which
And
is
that definitely worked for me. I've recently, and it is only recently, started realizing that I notice when I'm about to drift into a sleep state
yeah.
because I can feel my brain and my body just calm.
Yes.
And that is
Yeah.
new for me. And I don't know whether that's because I'm more able to be present, but that's incredible.
Yeah. That's brilliant. That's really good.
It's an incredible sensation, you know.
It is.
It's one I crave now. It's amazing.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. That's really good. So, right. So when we lose our purpose or identity, we can forget to go back to the basic core values that we have. This always serves as a starting block for who we are and what we care about. Sometimes if somebody says to us, oh, what are your core values, and we don't actually know, yes, we can look at what irritates us, but also we can ask family and friends about what mattered to us. They could say, oh, yes, you don't like this, because our family particularly will know us well enough. And you can use those to confirm who you want to be and start rebuilding who you think you are. And, and find out, test, see what you like doing, what you don't like doing. Is there anything particular that you really, really enjoy that would give you an indication of maybe what your values are? There's lots of things we can do when we lose our purpose and identity. The worst thing we can do is just to carry on in that no man's land. We need to find those values and to start thinking about who we want to be, because again, it's another opportunity to start to be somebody we want to be.
Yeah, we need to build the present to create the future, don't we?
We do.
Yeah.
Very much so. So again, we talked about mood swings earlier. We need to learn our triggers, what causes us to react, the situations. But this is especially when it comes to grief, because we were talking about these 90-minute wave of emotions. It's not permanent and it will pass.
Second.
Yes, second, sorry. Yeah, 90 minutes. That's a long time,
That was scary.
Yeah. So those 90 seconds waves of emotions with grief, they sneak up on you. You don't always know they're coming. So if you've got something in place to manage those when they're coming, and we know what those triggers might be. So we might know it's a piece of music. We might know it's a certain person. It might be a certain smell. It could be a place. If you're not ready to face that, then don't use it, but don't avoid it either. You need to learn to get used to that. But if you're worried about the emotion sneaking up on you, you do need to be able to know what your triggers are. Learning those triggers, even when you've got a bit of brain fog, can be hard. But if you know what those triggers are, it's going to make life a lot easier for you while you begin to heal. and manage that grief. Okay.
And sometimes it can just be a thought we have.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah,
You,
or a
you
memory,
know,
even a
and
memory
it can be really
sometimes.
difficult sometimes to think, well, what just triggered that?
Yes, yeah, very much so. Okay, so sometimes when we're going through all this, oh, we've got comfort eating, which eating, smoking, and drinking, which I put under coping mechanisms. I put there, I put unhealthy habits due to stress, because very often if we go through a loss of some sort, be it your job or whatever, we tend to just revert back to what our coping mechanisms are. So we might eat, we might smoke more, we might drink more, we might
And
behave in a way we
let's
shouldn't
remember that
do.
loss is a stress,
It is very much
you
so.
know.
And so we will revert to that. And unexpressed thoughts and grief are far more damaging if not expressed, giving our mind and body even more work to do on top of what it's already doing.
Yeah.
So it's really quite essential to have those healthy defenders in place so that we can manage what's going on. Sometimes a practical way to deal with these unhealthy habits is to get two piles of paper and get one pile of paper with the unhealthy things on you do, and put it on the floor, and next to it put the long-term consequences of what that might be. So for example, smoking or drinking or comfort eating. So smoking could be maybe lung problems long term later on, depending on how fit and healthy you are. The eating and drinking could be possibly diabetes or some sort of allergy and food allergy in that way that could occur because you're having excess of something. The drinking, as we all know, can maybe lead to you damaging your liver, but they're all difficult ones. So if you put down the unhealthy habit and then you put down next to it the consequence of that, and then underneath, put your healthy habits. So the good things you do, so walking, maybe socializing, eating well, put that down, but put the consequence of what it would be on the end. So that may be good health, fitness, stamina. And then look at both rows and say to yourself, which row do I want to choose? Because it will then highlight what unhealthy habits you've got. So if you've got more than one, right, put more than one down. It just opens your eyes up sometimes when you think about what you're doing in your life as to what's healthy and what's not healthy. And particularly with grief and loss, we can fall into a few unhealthy habits, which actually we don't even realize we're doing. So this exercise is quite a good exercise to do to see where we're sort of heading, which path we're heading on a little bit. Okay. So then we've got moving on to feeling alone after the breakup of a partnership. And with loss, sometimes we can feel really isolated that nobody else is experiencing what we're experiencing, because that is natural for us to think that, and that can be a perspective we have until we go and speak to somebody else who's going through the same thing. And they'll say, well, actually, I feel like that. And that can open that up for you. But again, you've got the similarity of feeling alone in perimenopause because you're feeling so rotten and you don't think anybody else is going through it. And then with loss, you're feeling isolated and you don't really think anybody else has experienced what you have. So you won't talk to anybody, you isolate yourself.
Yeah.
And we talked about socialization being one of your defenders. You must mix with people because the healing starts from that. Believe it or not, you'll hate being part of that little group, but actually you'll come away having healed just a tiny bit each time you meet other people. And we don't realize, because we're social creatures, we need that socialization that goes on.
And
Next
we
one.
often avoid it because of fear that, you know, we won't be able to cope.
Yes, very much so. But if you're with friends that are important to you, they will understand that and they will just be there if you need them. That's again about choosing the right people to be with, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. So the next one is aches and pains and heartbreak, which we've touched on a little bit. So aches and pains in our body reacting to the stress in loss and impairment, and aches and pains in our body reacting to the stress in loss and in perimenopause. The aches and pains are a signal to us to tell us the hormones are running low and we start to have all these other symptoms with it. And the aches and and when we're going through a traumatic thing, it's a physical manifestation of how the body is feeling during the trauma. The body is asking us to slow down so it can repair and protect itself and keep us safe until we're fully functioning again, which is why you get burnout, depression, because it's the brain shutting down saying, I can't cope anymore. We need to just rest. And that's why sleep again is so important as one of your defenders. Our
And
heart,
that thing I've talked about a lot, which is not having, having both calm mind and calm body.
yes,
And that's, that's kind of what deep sleep does. But when we're struggling with sleep, just building into our lives those moments of calm mind, calm body
and
are
rest.
really good for repairing.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Because our heart can feel like it's broken in two, or we can be numb in our emotions. Very often with grief, we can pick up an illness because our immune system is low.
Yeah.
Perimenopause can affect our emotions, so we can't function in our relationships. Somebody can ask us a question, and actually, genuinely, we don't know the answer because we just can't function. So you've got all that going on, and that can be really quite difficult if you're not feeling anything and you're just feeling very, very, if the heart is really painful, that's when we need to go back to eating properly, even if we don't feel like it. Socializing, because actually being with people can make us feel loved. The sleep, of course, and exercise for our hearts, because our hearts will then be distracted. They'll be working harder for going for a walk, or just, I don't know, running around the block, anything, just any exercise can then
getting yourself
move
outside in nature, because there's so much evidence out there now that it's the chemicals, I think, that you get in nature, from the woodlands or from the water. They're slightly different to what we get inside our houses, and they're apparently they're very, very good for us.
And in loss, I think we lose sight of everything around us. We can become very tunnel visioned in what's going on. Absolutely. And to be out in the world and still see the trees and the birds and the amazing nature can actually take us away from that tunnel vision a little bit sometimes, which we need.
And let's not forget that perimenopause means loss of our fertility.
Yes.
And for so many people, that's a huge thing. And we can get tunnel vision about that as well, because especially in this country, we've got this view that means it's the start of the end of our life.
Yes.
Not the beginning of the next season of our life. And that can make us experience all of these things so much worse.
Yes, most definitely. So as you can see on the last row there is brain fog and grief brain. Now, I think we're all very familiar with brain fog. I don't think there's anybody probably who hasn't come across brain fog, but grief brain is very, very similar. You can't think straight. You can't keep a thought in your head. You can't remember things. So you behave in pretty much the same way you would do now. And with grief brain, it's been proven by the World Health Organization that actually maze puzzles help cognitively with the traumatized connections in your brain, and it helps them rebuild. It works by teaching the brain to follow a set path so we can navigate situations and know we can begin to step out of that fog a little bit from time to time. It's to do with the connections, because when we get traumatized, those connections just they die. They're still there, but they don't function properly. And sometimes we need a cognitive and a brain exercise to get those going again, just to get them wound up again at the right levels.
And the science of that is essentially that in stress, the insulation and the connectivity between the neurons in our brain is not replenished.
Yes.
So because we're not using them.
Yes.
So as the more we use, the more the insulation is there, and the more effective they are.
Yeah.
And in perimenopause, it's to do with the hormones which the brain needs. They're involved in that repair and building, and so when they're changed, the brain is struggling with that a little bit. And if we add in stress, we make it a lot worse. Exactly.
So they recommend maze books. So start with children's ones, and then just for 5 minutes, then move up to the adult ones as and when you need it. But apparently it's very good for building those connections.
I certainly found when I was in my full-on burnout that I could get some functionality in my brain with some of those games on your phone. That's sort of the simple things that
sort of thing
were making me think. That required some form of problem solving.
Yes.
It wasn't the big picture that I wasn't able to see.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's because it's a bit like they reckon doing crossword a day helps with dementia and that sort of thing.
And I used to take, whenever I've been in hospital and been quite ill in hospital, logic puzzles and maze puzzles and things like that have been the things that I've used at that point as well.
Yeah, and
I know in the early stages of dementia with my mom, we were using those and jigsaws of
Yeah, they're good.
a decreasing number of pieces, but
Yes.
there's so much out there that
Yes.
you can actually access.
Because I mean, I only came across this because I was looking at brain injuries, and they use Lego builds, but they use
Yes.
the big Lego builds because it's the
Yeah.
time spent, and it really makes a difference.
And
So
it's physical, it's also motor connections as well. And when you're using
yeah,
your, it's like the old science of brain gym, which was defunct a little bit, but it's that whole kind of idea that physical action as well as mental action
yes,
builds stronger connections.
yes, very much so, very much so. So when we experience, let's go back one, sorry, that's gone too far. When we experience the loss of a family member, our role can change, and that causes confusion too. We need to be the lionesses that remember them and share the memories, but we must celebrate the life rather than the death. And this goes back to what I was talking about with creating memories and remembering those memories rather than the end. Remember the good stuff and all the stuff that made us remember them, makes us smile, because sometimes we can think of a memory and we smile, and that in turn then creates the happy hormones, and it all makes things a lot easier. So we must celebrate the life rather than the death, and that can be quite hard if the death has been a difficult death in some way. People don't always
What
manage
about
it.
that sense of guilt that I shouldn't be feeling joy?
That's very much coming from within us because they're not here anymore. But if you were able to speak to them, what would they say to you? Would they want you to feel guilty? They wouldn't, would they?
I'm just aware that, in conversations that I've had and with others and things like that, that sometimes we get this real strong sense that I really shouldn't be
Feeling guilty.
positive in this moment. I really shouldn't be enjoying myself. What right have I got to be enjoying myself?
Well, this is where guilt is a little bit sneaky. It's a bit like grief. It can come up behind you and suddenly take over you. I need
Yes.
to come back to you on that because I have got a section on guilt, which I can't quite remember at the moment. I do know it, but I can't quite get it in my head. But there's a very good section on grief in my program, which deals with where the grief's coming from, how we can manage the grief. And really, what's the perspective on the grief? Is that you putting that pressure on yourself, or is
Yeah.
that something legitimate from
And I
the
think
way
that thing
that
that you
it
said
happened?
about what would that person want, and the last thing that they'd want, if that was a caring relationship of some sort, whatever
Exactly.
that relationship was, that person would definitely not want you feeling guilty in the
No.
same way as loss of pets and all of these other things.
Mm.
Guilt within grief can be quite destroying and make us feel
Destructive.
that
Yes.
we're not able to live our life going forwards. But that's not what that person or thing would want.
No. And I think sometimes guilt is a little bit like these other things we've been talking about. It needs to come out of the head, it needs to come out of the heart and come out on the table so we can really look at where it's coming from, because it
Yeah.
actually might not have any connotation on that person at all. It could be something that went on while they were caring for them. It could be a conversation they had before they weren't here anymore. There could be all those things that could be causing the guilt, but actually they're not actually to do with what's happened with that person.
No.
So that's very much, but I have got a section on that in my program that I deal with, but I haven't got time to talk about it now.
No, that's absolutely fine. It
Okay,
just came into my head at that point.
that's
Apologies
fine.
for
That's fine.
sideswiping you yet again.
That's fine, no worries. Right, so I've got likewise in perimenopause, our memory does not function as well as it should. With loss, we need to hang on to those memories. They are the armor we need when it comes to managing our grief. We need the good memories to engulf the bad ones through mindful practices. Because our memories may not be functioning as well as they should, pictorial memories are so important, and recorded filming is really good in this day and age too. So it's probably quite important to us if we can't file those memories away, because not everybody can take those memories that I was talking about, the present memories, and put them away. Sometimes we go, oh, she's taking more photos, but actually that's a really good thing to do, because when we look at photos, it's a bit like smells. They bring the memory back, and photos would bring the memories back as well. So they are really, really useful for that. In one of the books I've read, Grief Day by Day by Jan Warner, and Loss, she talks about keeping a picture of that person nearby and talk to them. Don't feel silly talking to them, because actually they are still listening to you. If you come home to an empty house, tell them about your day. You would have done that previously. So continue to do that in the early days when it's really hard to come home to that empty house. when I was talking to my godfather, he said that was the worst thing for him, was coming home to the empty house, and he'd put a radio on. And I said to him about putting this picture there, and he said, actually, it's like coming home to her, having that picture on the mantelpiece. If I've had a bad day, I can come in and say, oh, so and so annoyed me, and then it comes out. It's not inside us. And you might feel silly, or it might sound silly, but actually it's got quite a healing, it's quite cathartic to get that out to the picture. And actually, depending on what you believe, they're still listening. They're just elsewhere at the moment. So they're still listening to what you've got to say. And some of the things we do in the grief program is we do mindful practices where we do talk to our loved ones, but we do it in a way where we're trying to find out what advice they would give us on what we're asking them. So there are some things we can do in that way that can help as well. So sometimes we need to focus on the positive emotion that's attached to the situational memory, as we're hardwired to focus on the negative. Like Jane said earlier, a brain dump can help with this, so we can dwell on the positive. It takes a bit of training to do, but it is possible to do that so that we can function and get it out from inside to out, really. So how do we combat this loss? How do we, whoops, wrong way. How do we deal with this? How do we cope with this loss? So we've got moving and exercise, just living day by day. If you just get up and shower and you don't do anything else that day, and this is for confidence and everything else. If you're not feeling yourself, just get up and shower and go back to bed so that you've done something. Be kind to yourself, eat well, get professional support if you need it. Be honest how you feel with your close friends. Don't be frightened of how they will react. Use them as a buffer to say what you're feeling. Remember our loved ones with all good memories. Sleep when you need to and keep to your bedtime routine. Socialize, even if you're not really feeling it, you won't know you're healing. And if you notice, all of these are part of the 4 defenders. So you've got exercise in there, you've got eating well in there, you've got sleeping well, and you've got the socialization, which all need to be natural habits. Because one of the things that a lot of people say is that the more people they know socially, the quicker they heal, because they're around people that love them. And the key to this is supporting one another. So there are a number of different things we can do to help others, but this is what we can do for ourselves. Is there anything on this page that other people have done for themselves to cope with some sort of loss that I've not got on here? Has anybody put anything in the chat maybe that they have been able to do?
I'll keep an eye on the chat and I'll feed it back to you, because obviously it takes time for people to type in.
Yes,
I've got nothing
fine
to add to that. I think it's quite a useful list, actually, and quite a useful way of reminding ourselves to take care of ourselves.
Yes, very much so. Okay, so right, so helping others is just as important, and this is really what my mission is to try and help everybody to open up about grief and to really support one another. So some of the things we can do is just listen, but don't stop the emotion. So if you've got a friend who's going through a really rough time, just sit with them, just listen. Don't stop the tears, because that emotion needs to come out. But one of the things I say, it's the love for that person coming out of their eyes. So it needs to come out, but it's an indication of how much they love that person. So those tears need to happen. So that's a really good thing. But sometimes just being there, being present, but not saying anything can be really comforting. You've also got hugs. Hugs are amazing for all of us. We all love a good hug. They convey so much support to others who are going through those circumstances.
I read something the other day that said we needed 8 hugs a day. I'm all for that.
Yeah, which I think we do need, because we're social creatures. We need that social interaction, basically.
There's something comforting, isn't there, in that sort of embrace?
Very much so. So that you've got the next one is get them out for a walk in nature and remind them of the beauty in the world they may have forgotten. Point out the trees, point out the birds, listen to what's going on around you. Take them away from that trauma that they're in, and really open up what they might need to just hear. Still see the beauty in the world, because we can lose that when we've gone through loss very easily. Take them some food, even if it's a Kit Kat. They may be missing that personal attention from somebody, or from someone who's no longer here, or from a relationship they used to have. They might have had a certain food. So we all have our favorite foods, and we know that can be comforting. So sometimes it's a good idea just to go and take somebody some food and sit with them, or maybe invite them out to lunch, because it's very lonely when you're on your own sometimes, and sometimes you just need some company. You can also start a new hobby with that person. That can be a really good thing to do together, because that will build your relationship, and it's a distraction as well, because I don't know if anybody watches Strictly, but there was a lady on there called Annabelle Croft, and she lost her husband a year to 18 months ago. She took up the dancing on Strictly, and her light has come back completely. You know, she's starting to feel like her again. So sometimes having a new distraction, new hobby can really help with.
We've got a couple of messages that have come in as well.
Okay.
One saying very much what you were saying about trying to remember the good things, and
Yeah.
another one saying clients, this person works on wills and things like that. So
Okay.
clients like to talk about the deceased without them feeling that they are putting people in awkward position.
Yes. That's
And
a
I
big
think
one.
giving people that space to just talk is so important. That's such
Really
a
important.
wonderful thing that this person's doing, because that's creating, you know, an amazing space, isn't it?
It is, and that's a very difficult subject to talk about, because that's sort of being realistic with yourself about what's happening. And that can be a really, really quite grounding thing to do, and actually can pull you up quite short sometimes about what you might do or might not do, and that's really hard sometimes. So yeah, that's an amazing job she's doing, because you do need a safe space to do that, and that's a difficult to create a safe space when you're doing things like that. That's amazing. So the other thing is just send them a message or give them a call to say you're thinking of them. So if this was applied to you and you were going through some sort of trauma, be it loss of identity, loss of confidence, loss of pet, or loss of a family member, what would you actually want somebody to do for you? What would give you comfort?
Do you know what? I think it's the connection, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
people actually reaching out and connecting, because that
Yes.
just is incredible.
Yeah. It is. It's brilliant.
It means you're in their mind.
Yes. Yeah. And also, what we might want, somebody else, it would give us a starting point, because it's very difficult when you've got somebody going through trouble. You don't always know what to do.
Yeah.
So maybe if you know them quite well, what you would like, they might be all right with as well, because they know you. So that's a starting point for going and saying to somebody, I'm here, but use what you would use for you. So that can be really helpful. So what we do need to remember is a lot of these losses lead to new beginnings or do-overs, or a chance to be a new you if you're brave enough. Take courage, put your defenders in place, and face losses head on. You'll be a loss or grief warrior in no time, with memories as your armor, love as your shield, and a spear of courage. I run a loss cafe. If anybody is interested in just talking to me about any sort of loss, and they just want to get it out from their head, out from their hearts, so it's out elsewhere and not in their heads, I will be available on my email. You can then book a space with me once you come to my email. But I do this so that people can just talk, because sometimes when people are on their own, they want to talk about somebody, but their friends are all bored or sick to the back teeth of hearing it, or they glaze over, and you know that they've had enough. I'm always here. I've always got ears, and I will create a safe space for you just to talk to me about somebody or something that's happened if you need it. Because sometimes family are great, but they can start talking. Sometimes we just need a pair of ears. So thank you for listening to me all. Thank you all for listening to me. I am on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Go and make precious memories with people who are really important to us. Make the world a better place to live. We all need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracey, because I think, you know, I just think it's an amazing thing. And I've just written in the messages and on Facebook that the Lost Cafe is just an amazing idea.
Thank you.
Just that space,
Yeah.
you know, where it's okay to chat and have that conversation is incredible, because it also helps build a connection to that person or thing that you've lost, doesn't it?
Very much so. And it's to get our emotions so we can get a handle on them and accept them and notice what's happening, so that we can cope with them and move forward. Because like we said earlier, we need to be able to cope with them so they don't damage us mentally and physically more.
Yeah. I think the more we hold these things in, the more damage they do. We know that, don't we? We know that hugely. And when it comes to, you know, linking this into why we're doing this in the menopause group, we're of that age where there's so much coming at us, where loss is something that we're experiencing personally in terms of within ourselves,
Oh,
but
very much so.
also within our circle of family and things like that. It's something that we struggle to talk about. So thank you so much for
So
coming in the group and doing
thank
this
you. Thank
today.
you for having me on your group.